16 years ago, a group of 18 people met to pray and decide whether or not they should start a new church here in Lake Country. It wasn't that Lake Country needed a new church. They believed that Lake Country needed a different kind of church, a church for people who gave up on church. So part of the process was discerning what God was calling each of them to surrender to Him in order to pursue what they believed God was calling them to do. So everyone wrote a commitment of how much they would give financially to launch the new church. And it was more than they had ever committed to give before. But out of this surrendered act of generosity in this defining moment, Hope Church was born. From the beginning, we knew that we wanted to be a church that is a light in the darkness and that brings the healing power of God to the broken. A church that brings hope to the hopeless.
I was invited to Hope, and I came, I think at the time, just to kind of, prove that there wasn't anything there for me that was going to be helpful. I was filled with anxiety and fear, and I got to a point where I was questioning where was God in my life and why was He allowing the things to happen to me that were happening to me. And the Michelle before today, the Michelle that first came to Hope 7 years ago, it's a girl that I don't even recognize. And I can't imagine still being that person.
We knew we wanted to be about one thing: Jesus' mission for the church of changing lives and changing eternities. It was this dream and this compelling vision that led me to become Hope's pastor 9 years ago. My first year, about 70 people were attending Hope. Fast forward to today, and we see over 500 people coming every Sunday as their lives are being transformed by Jesus. So many lives have been forever changed by the ministry of Hope, all because that small group of visionaries, motivated by what could be and what should be, took everything they had and they put it in Jesus' hands. And they got to see God show up and do a miracle. They got to see God show up and do more than they had asked or even imagined that God might do through Hope Church. All of this reminds me of what the Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 3. Now to Him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us, to Him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. When people seek to give glory to Jesus in the church, and they take whatever they have and they put it in God's hands, it doesn't matter how small the group is. It doesn't matter how little they have, because God loves to show up and surprise us by doing even more than we could ask or imagine when our one aim is to glorify Jesus. And that's why we're excited about what God has in store for our future. This fall, we're embarking on a new season at Hope. A season that I believe we'll look back on in 10 years and say that was a defining moment. A defining moment where God took us to a level we've never been before. A defining moment when the mission that God had called us on was advanced in ways we had only dreamed about previously. In fact, I believe this will be the most significant moment in the history of our church since that decision to step out on faith and launch Hope Church. We're entering a season where we're going to become even more ready to advance the mission Jesus has called us on. And this is why we're calling the season that we're entering this fall the Second Stage Initiative. You see, when a rocket launches, the first stage engine is critical for getting the rocket off the ground and into the air. During that first stage, the rocket lifts off, it clears the launch pad, it gains speed, it gains altitude, and the mission is begun. But when the first stage runs out of fuel, the rockets detach and the second stage engines fire, and it's the second stage engines that accelerate the rocket to even greater speed so that it gains even more momentum. The second stage is what propels the rocket into a position from which it can successfully accomplish the mission. The second stage is critical for achieving mission success. That's the perfect analogy for where we're at as a church. We've had an incredible first stage. We got off the ground, we've gained so much elevation as a church, we've made so much progress in our mission. But we've reached the point where the first stage is running out of fuel. We've started to hit the ceiling in terms of the number of people we can reach and engage as a portable church. So, we've come to a fork in the road. We're looking at one of two possible futures right now. One is to continue where we're at, flatten out, and plateau because restrictions won't allow us to reach our full potential and then inevitably become a stagnant church. Or we can fire the next stage of rockets and break through to a new level of impact.
What excites me about Second Stage is just the potential to find all these unchurched folks who are seeking and searching for something big and important in their life, and this is going to find them at the right time.
We'll be able to bring the message of Jesus to more people.
Hope Church, it's time for us to take our discipleship and our generosity to the next level of obedience. It's time to take a step that will generate unprecedented momentum, that will not only position us to be successful in our mission of changing lives and eternities, but I believe it will even change us as individuals. Our hope is to see God accomplish 3 mission-critical initiatives at a level we've never seen before. First, we want to elevate our ministry. We want to position ourselves so that God can use Hope Church to change more lives and eternities than ever before. To elevate our ministry, we're setting a goal of $1.64 million over the next 2 years. Our vision has always been to create a church that attracts and engages the unchurched. Second Stage will be a catalyst that elevates that vision to an even higher level, giving us the resources we need to continue forward and elevate us to the next stage of ministry at Hope. This $1.64 million is what we call our general budget, which is anything but general. This amount will not only allow us to continue changing lives and eternities, it will allow us to elevate our ministry by improving areas like student ministry and increase our impact through technology. Second, we want to elevate our mission. We're setting a goal of $1.6 million to acquire a permanent facility in Lake Country. The only reason we want to acquire a facility is so that we have a tool to help us pursue what God has called us to do. Not just to be a church in Lake Country, but to be a church for Lake Country and beyond. A facility will not only allow us to gather, it will allow us to send and reach more people in more communities. It will become a new launch pad from which we can launch more locations of Hope Church online and in other communities. This facility will be a tool to help us change lives and eternities in Lake Country and beyond. This $1.6 million will elevate our mission of changing lives and eternities. Third, we want to elevate our impact. Our mission doesn't stop with us. Since we began the Christmas offering 5 years ago, we've given away well over $100,000 to charities and ministries that are making a difference with problems related to homelessness, healthcare, hunger, education, and poverty.
My name's Jeff. This is my wife, Annette. Our first visit to Hope was almost 4 years ago, and we happened to come on the Sunday that was Christmas in Lake Country, and we were just so overwhelmed with the generosity that seemed to come from that. It was not we're collecting money for church and doing something for church. It was we're collecting money to spread it to the community, and that was just so overwhelmingly impressive to me.
It was such a novel idea that we had really not experienced before. It just struck us both. We both went out to the car after the service and went, wow, can you believe what they just did?
In the Second Stage initiative, we're going to elevate that impact by setting a goal of $160,000 to give away to our partner charities and ministries. Altogether, that means we're setting a goal of raising $3.4 million in the next 2 years to elevate our church through these 3 kingdom building initiatives. Second Stage is a one-fund initiative. That means that every dollar will go to support these 3 initiatives over the next 2 years. We're not opening a building fund for people to give to separately. Because it's all one mission, it's all one fund. Everything given over the next 2 years will go to Second Stage. To be clear, $3.4 million over 2 years is a God-sized goal. However, it's important to remember that it's only our secondary goal. Our primary goal with Second Stage is 100% engagement. That 100% of us would go before God and experience the faith-changing power of generosity, because generosity generates change. God doesn't need our money. He doesn't need our resources to accomplish what He is going to accomplish in our generation and beyond. What He wants is for us to put Him first. To put Him first in our hearts, in our lives, and in our priorities.
A difficult aspect for generosity, for myself personally, sometimes comes when we were not making a lot of money, when we were just trying to make ends meet. We were just trying to put food on the table and rent, and we're just trying to be like, how are we going to afford this and give? But every time that we gave, He always provided for us.
Through Second Stage, you might take the biggest step of faith you've ever taken. Not only that, the Second Stage initiative will be a big step of faith for Hope Church. This is the largest thing we've ever done as a church. And this is why you, and this is why Hope, will be changed by it. And that's why in 10 years, this season will be remembered as a defining moment in the life of our church. I invite you to participate and be part of this historic season, this defining moment of hope. You and I get to lay a foundation that far outlives us. We get to be part of impacting thousands of lives today and for generations to come. I'm inviting you to the next stage of your faith and the second stage of impact for hope. In the words of the Apostle Paul, let's do something that glorifies Jesus to the degree that God decides to show up and do more than we ask and more than we imagined. Let's elevate our generosity to the point that it shows that our only aim is to bring glory to Jesus in the church and pursue the mission He gave us of changing lives and changing eternities.
Aren't you glad you're in church today? This is so exciting. I'm glad you're in church today because you are here on a very important day. Because today is the day that we are stepping forward into our future as a church. Today is a day when we are beginning a journey that will impact thousands and thousands of lives and eternities in Lake Country and beyond. Today is the day we are starting the second stage of Hope Church. This is a 5-week-long series. I'm going to spend 5 weeks talking about our second stage, and there are a few things you need in order to fully engage with this series. The first thing you need is your official second stage mission guide. So if you somehow snuck past our greeters and managed to refuse one, go ahead and raise your hand. You are going to need one of these for the series. Raise your hand. One of our ushers will come by and get you a book. You'll need that for the series, so go ahead and grab that. In fact, you're going to need this in your small groups. If you're in a small group here at Hope Church, you're going to need to take this to your small groups. All of your study guides are in there. And you need to bring it back every single week of the series because you have a space for message notes every single week. In fact, today we're on page 29. Take it home, read it. There's more information than I got to in the video that you'll find in the book. All the information is right there, so you'll want to become familiar with that. The second thing that you're going to need for this series is your Second Stage t-shirt. So I don't know if you realize, once you're wearing a Second Stage t-shirt, you can do almost anything. You can cut the grass, you can go shopping, you can make tea and read a book, and you can wear it to church next Sunday and be totally cool for wearing jeans and a t-shirt to church, and no one's going to think anything of it. So if you don't have a Second Stage t-shirt yet, we've got free ones in the lobby, men's, women's, all adult sizes. Grab one for free at the Second Stage hub in the lobby on your way out this morning if you don't have one yet. And the last thing you're going to need for this series, in the back of your mission guide, there's a card that looks like this. I want you to grab that in your hand right now, if you would, please. This is your Second Stage commitment card, and this is the most exciting thing we have in this entire series. This card is the coolest part of what we're going to be doing in this 5-week series. And we're not going to do anything with it today. I just wanted you to see it, and there's more information on there. We're going to use this at the end of the series, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on in our message this morning. Now, when we watched the video, I know there were all kinds of reactions in the room. For some of us, the reaction was excitement. You've been part of this church for a while. You believe in the mission of this church. And to see that we are going to take a big step forward as a church, you were just all excited. But for some of us in the room, you watched the video and you thought to yourself, $3.4 million in 2 years? That's why I stopped going to church, okay? The church just wants something from me. The church just wants my money. And someone invited you to Hope and they said, oh no, Hope isn't like any other church you've ever been to. It's totally different. And you came here this morning and you saw $3.4 million and you thought, this is exactly like every other church I've ever been to. This church wants something from me. They are trying to squeeze my money out of me. Now, I will be the first to acknowledge that the church has often done a terrible job on the topic of money. The church has. We can be honest about that. And if I had experienced what you've experienced in your church background when it comes to the church and money, I know for a fact my shields would already be way up on this one. So let me give you an out if that's what you're thinking at this point. My intended audience for this series is the people who call Hope their church. My audience is all of the people who consider Hope to be their church. You're benefiting from this church. We're your church. That's my audience. So if you're newer to Hope or we're not your church, I totally get that you don't trust me, you don't trust us, you don't know us yet. And I would never, ever ask anyone to blindly trust anyone. That's just never a good idea, including, unfortunately, when it comes to church. So if that's you, I want you to know right now, you have my blessing to make a decision today. And the decision I want you to make today is that you are not going to give $1 to this church. You honestly, sincerely, you have my blessing to decide right now, I'm not giving $1 to this church because I think they want something from me. Now, I can't really single you out and say, how many of you feel this way, that the church just wants my money? So I thought what we would do is I would have everybody repeat after me, I'm not giving $1 to this church, because that way those of us who feel it can just express the way we really feel. So I know that sometimes when I ask you to say something, you kind of mumble it, I'm not giving $1 to this church. But this time, I want you to say it like you feel it, okay? So on the count of 3, we're all going to say that phrase together. 1, 2, 3, I'm not giving $1 to this church. Glad nobody used any swear words with that one. You have my blessing to not give $1 to this church. But I will not give you my blessing to disregard what Jesus taught on the topic of generosity. You have my blessing to say, I'm not going to financially support this church. You do. But you do not have my blessing to say, I'm not going to become a generous person. Because based on what Jesus taught about the subject of generosity, generosity is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, and we have the capacity to harness that force. In fact, there's really only one idea that I'm going to be talking about today and for the next 4 weeks. We're going to unpack a little of this idea in every part of the series because it's such a life-changing idea that we find in the teachings of Jesus. Here's the big idea we're talking about in Second Stage. Generosity generates change. Generosity generates change. If you are a generous person, if you become a generous person, it will fundamentally change who you are, and it will change your life. Generosity is like a key that opens a door into a whole new area of living. Generosity is the only path to get to a life that is truly satisfied and truly content with what you have. There's no way to get there apart from generosity. Generosity is the key that opens the door that allows you to a new place where you can become the kind of person that deep down you want to be. And for those of us who are Christians, for those of us in the room who say, I follow Jesus, I believe that Jesus died on a cross for my sins and He rose on the third day, here's what you need to hear. You will not experience significant spiritual growth in your life until you become financially generous. Generosity generates change. So if you don't trust us yet, you don't know us, you have my permission to not give $1 to this church. But for your own sake, give it somewhere. Be generous somewhere. Give it to your favorite charity. Give it to another church. I don't care. This is too important in your life to ignore. And not only does generosity generate change in our hearts, not only does it generate change in our lives, generosity has the power to change the community and the world around us. I want you to imagine for a moment, if we as a church can accomplish everything we pray God will allow us to accomplish over the next 2 years, I want you to imagine for a moment the impact that will have in Lake Country and beyond. I want you to imagine the number of marriages that will be saved. Can you imagine the number of addictions that will be broken? Can you imagine the number of middle school and high school students who won't just survive this season of life with their faith intact, but they will make God-honoring choices because they are part of this church that will set them up for a huge impact for the rest of their lives? Can you imagine the thousands of lives and the thousands of eternities that God wants to change through the mission of this church? And we know God wants that because He gave His Son Jesus so that can happen. Generosity generates change in our lives and in our hearts and in the world around us. Now, the first place we're going to see this idea expounded on is from a very important event from the life of Jesus. In fact, this was an event that happened that was so important. All 4 biographers of the life of Jesus wrote about it. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they each wrote a biography of the life of Jesus. And this was something that all 4 of them made sure to include in their biographies. What happened was one time Jesus wanted to be alone. He was exhausted. So he and his disciples got in a boat and they sailed across the Sea of Galilee to a very remote area. And when they got to the other side of the sea, what they discovered is that so many people wanted to be near Jesus that they walked around the Sea of Galilee on foot and met Him there as He disembarked from the boat. Literally, thousands and thousands of people gathered to see Jesus. And when He saw the crowds, His heart went out to them. He had compassion on them. So He spent an entire day ministering to them, healing the sick, teaching them the Word of God. And finally, when the sun began to set, the disciples said, Jesus, listen, we got to send these people home, okay? Would you land the plane on this sermon? They walked a long way to be here. There is nowhere to get food here. They might collapse from exhaustion on the way home, Jesus. We need to get them out of here. And besides, we're exhausted too, and you haven't slept in a couple days, it looks like, Jesus. Let's just dismiss church early and get out of here. Now, when they said that, Jesus said something fascinating. In Matthew chapter 14, Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Now, first of all, there's nowhere to get food. I mean, nowhere. They are in a remote area. There are no stores, no restaurants, nothing around. And even if there were so many thousands of people there, this would have been like a $40,000 or $50,000 catering bill. Okay? They have no way to do what Jesus just commanded them to do. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. They don't know what to do with that. But in the audience that day, there was a boy who heard what Jesus said. There was a boy who heard Jesus say, you give them something to eat. So this little boy looks in his sack, and his mom's lunch that he gave him for the day was in his sack. And he thought to himself, Jesus just told me to do something. So I'm going to go pull on the robe of one of these important men and give him my lunch because Jesus said, you give them something to eat. Here's what happened. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Like, okay, here's what we have to feed the thousands of people, Jesus. We have 5 loaves of bread and we have 2 small fish, but that's not going to make a difference. Jesus said, well, bring them here. Jesus blessed them, and he started breaking them into pieces and handing them to the 12 disciples and saying, okay, go give these to everybody. And they're like, okay, I guess we have to. So they take the food to the people, and the food, they just keep handing it out, and as they hand it out, there's more, and as they hand it out, there's more, and as they hand it out, there's more. And eventually, here's what happened at the end of the story. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. In a culture where food was scarce, in a culture where you could not just go home, open the fridge, see if anything looks good, and if nothing looks good, you decide to order takeout. In a culture where everybody scraped every plate clean because that's how you survived, 12 basketfuls were left over. Why 12? Because I think Jesus wants every single disciple to have a little object lesson to carry home about what he means when he says, you give them something to eat. If I told you to do something, you don't need to worry about how. You just do what I told you to do, and I'll show up and do what only I can do. Now, if generosity generates change, here's the question we want to ask. Who was changed that day? If generosity generates change, who was changed that day? Well, in one sense, the crowd was changed. They might not have seen the details of the miracle, but they knew something big happened, and their love and their trust in Jesus definitely grew that day, so they were changed by the boy's generosity. But what kind of impact do you think that day had on this boy? What do you think the rest of his lifelong relationship with money and possessions looked like as a result of that day? Imagine this boy growing up, working a job, getting married, raising kids in a culture that is subsistence-based living. They're always one drought, one famine away from complete disaster. What do you think this kid who grew up into a young man who would have raised his own family thought every time money was tight? His wife's coming like, honey, money's tight. I don't know how we're going to pay the bills this month. He would have been like, are you kidding me? Seriously? There was that one day when I gave Jesus my lunch and he fed thousands of people with my lunch. You know what? I think we're going to be okay. Imagine the financial freedom this kid felt for the rest of his life. Imagine how free and carefree and stress-free and worry-free he felt with money and possessions for the rest of his life. Why? Because when he obeyed what Jesus said about generosity, he got a front row seat to God's abundant faithfulness. He just did what Jesus asked him to do, and Jesus showed up to do what only he could do. He just took what he had and he put it in Jesus' hands, and Jesus showed up and did more than he could ask and more than he could even imagine. But Matthew, who wrote this account, tells us that there was someone else who was changed that day. And the other person who was changed by this boy's generosity was Peter. Peter, the head of the 12 disciples. In fact, Matthew tells us that something happened next that shows us how impactful this was in the heart of Peter. Here's what happened, verse 22. Immediately, so as soon as they collect the 12 basketfuls, they kind of hold the basket, they're looking up at Jesus. Here's what happens. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Now, prayer is so important, not just to dump out our wish lists on God. Prayer is something God gave us to clean out our hearts so that we can hear from Him. And we know Jesus was in a season right now of incredible grief. His cousin John the Baptist had just been executed, and he hasn't had any time to mourn that yet, so he goes by himself and needs to clean out his heart, bear it before the Lord, and hear from his Father in heaven. That's why prayer is important. So he says, you guys get in the boat, I'll meet you on the other side. He goes to be by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. during the fourth watch of the night. Now, let me pause for a moment. So, when evening came, they got in the boat. They get to the fourth watch in the night. This is somewhere around 4 in the morning. So, here's roughly what they had to do. They had to get in a boat on one side of Lake Geneva, row the length of Lake Geneva, starting at evening till 4 in the morning, in a fierce storm, white-capped waves, into a fierce headwind, with no shore lights to guide them. Okay, this is what they were trying to do. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost." "Ruh-oh, Raggy. It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. Now, here's what I love about this story. Matthew was in the boat. And this is one of those small things that lets me know that Matthew's account is so accurate, because if he were making up this story, it would go something like this. "And when the disciples saw Jesus walking out onto the lake, they all started to chant, 'MVP, MVP.' And Jesus came and he hit a home run and everyone was saved." No, they were terrified. They had such little faith and such little confidence, and their fear was so big when they see Jesus coming out to them on the lake. And look what Jesus said. Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." Now, the most common command in the Bible is don't be afraid. And do you know why that's the most common command in the Bible? Because we live in a world where there is so much to fear. And when Jesus comes and he says, "Don't be afraid," he never says, "Don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of." That's what we tell our kids, okay? If your kid wakes up in the middle of the night and they're crying and you go into the room and say, Don't worry, sweetheart, there's nothing to be afraid of." Liar, you are lying. There is so much to be afraid of in our world, isn't there? But Jesus never says, "Don't be afraid," because there's nothing to be afraid of. He says, "Don't be afraid." Why? It's me. Don't be afraid because I am with you in this storm. Don't be afraid because I am with you in the midst of all these things that are here to induce fear in your heart. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Now, at this moment, this light bulb goes off in Peter's mind. At this moment, something suddenly clicks in the mind of Peter. You can almost see the wheels turning as he suddenly realizes, wait a minute. We were just on the other side of the lake, and Jesus gave us a command. You give them something to eat. And we had an excuse about why this wouldn't work. And I know somebody in that crowd had something to eat, okay? Somebody's got some lamb jerky in their pocket. Somebody's got some Fig Newtons for the kids. In fact, I might have had something in my pocket. But no one was willing to obey Jesus except that kid. That kid was fearless. He just took what he had. He obeyed Jesus, and he said, "Here you go." And Jesus did what only Jesus could do. When the kid did what Jesus told him to do, Jesus showed up to do what only Jesus can do. And now we're in another situation where we are in over our heads. I wonder if my new theory is true. I wonder if I just do whatever Jesus tells me to do, if he will show up and do what only he can do. So he decides to test out his brand new theory. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied. Okay, if it's you, truly the Son of God, truly the one we have put our hope and confidence in, if it's you, Peter replied, "Tell me. You tell me to come to you on the water." So Peter knows enough about himself to know sometimes I get ideas and they are terrible ideas. And as a pastor, I have seen Christians have all kinds of terrible ideas, but they put God's name on their idea and think that this was something that God opened the door for them to do because some door in their life opened up. But God never endorsed it, and Jesus never invited them, and Jesus never commanded them. And Peter gets this, and he says, "Okay, God, if that's you, Jesus, if that's you, I want you to give me a command. Would you command me to step out onto the lake with you? Because I'm suspicious that if I do what you tell me to do, you'll show up and do what only you can do." "Come," he said. mean, I just imagine Jesus is delighted at this moment. He's like, all right, you want an invitation from me to do something you can't do? Awesome. Peter, come here. Come out on the water with me. I, Jesus, am commanding you to walk to me on the water, Peter. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. It actually happened. When he obeyed Jesus, Jesus showed up to do what only he could do. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Now, what was it that caused Peter to begin to sink? Fear. When his focus was taken off of Jesus and Jesus' invitation to obey him, and he began to look at everything that could go wrong all around him, fear took over. And that's what fear does in your life. Fear wants you to take your eyes off Jesus. Fear wants you to focus on everything around you in your life that could possibly go wrong. Because if fear can convince you to look at everything in your life that can go wrong, it knows you will take your eyes off of Jesus. And if you take your eyes off of Jesus, then you can only have yourself left to trust in. And when Peter only had himself left to trust in, he began to sink. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You know why it was immediately? Because he was right there. He could just grab him and touch him and hold him and help him. He was right there. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Jesus is saying, Peter, dude, you had this. You had this. You obeyed me. You trusted me. You had this. Why did you begin to doubt? Peter, why did you begin to doubt me? The guy who just fed 5,000 people with some Lunchables. Why would you doubt me? The guy who goes strolling across the lake at 4 a.m. Peter, you had this. Why did you doubt? Why did you take your eyes off of me? Because when we obey what Jesus invites us to do, Jesus shows up to do what only He can do. Now, there is a way that all of us in the room have already benefited from this truth and from this principle. If you benefit from this church, do you know why that is? It's not because of me. There are so many reasons why you benefit from this church, but ultimately, at the root of it all, this church would not be here if it were not for a handful of families years ago who reached the conclusion, we believe that Jesus is calling us to start a new church. And they did not know how to start a new church. And they could not financially resource the start of a new church. And they had never started a new church before, but they reached the conclusion, Jesus is inviting us to start a new church. And do you know what they decided to do? They decided to be obedient to what they believed Jesus was calling them to do, and they trusted Jesus to show up and do what only He could do. So they took the little that they had and they put it into Jesus' hands, hoping that He would see the miracle. And as a result of their surrendered act of generosity, do you know what happened? A whole lot of change, because generosity generates change. If your life has been changed by this church, the seed that launched all of that grew up was their generosity. And because of their generosity, your life has been forever changed through Hope Church. But not only has your life been changed, there's still a few of those people in this room this morning. And if you ask any of them, they will tell you that the lives that were truly changed were theirs. And the reason why their lives were truly changed was because, like the boy, when they obeyed Jesus and took what they had and they put it in His hands, they got the front row seat to see God's abundant faithfulness show up in their lives and in the lives of hundreds and hundreds of other people. And today, church, I'm inviting you to become part of that legacy of changing lives and eternities. I'm inviting all of us to take this season of Second Stage and make it a season where we are attentive to what Jesus is calling all of us to do in terms of our generosity. Where we are attentive to what Jesus is calling all of us to do in terms of what He wants us and invites us to put into His hands. So that our generosity will not only change the world around us, it will change us as we are the next group of people that get to see from the front row God's abundant faithfulness as we obey Him and see Him show up and do what only He can do. Now, to help you with that, I've got 3 homework assignments that I'm asking of you this week. 3 homework assignments. And all of these are designed to help us address fear. Fear in our lives is an opponent that wants you to take your eyes off of Jesus. And here's how it works. Fear wants to puff itself up and make it look so big in your life. It wants to look bigger than Jesus. It wants to look stronger than Jesus. It wants to look more powerful than Jesus, because if your fear can convince you to take your eyes off Jesus, fear will know that you'll start to trust yourself and your understanding rather than Jesus, when all the while Jesus is saying, why would you doubt? Why would you doubt me if I am with you? Why would you doubt me if I invited you? Think about this. Jesus is the only God we can serve who, when we fail, will still be faithful. Because Jesus is the God who came to earth to give up His life for you on the cross. He lived without sin in your place. He died on the cross in your place, bearing your sin before God so that you have an incredible inheritance waiting for you in heaven. It is waiting for you, church, in heaven. And if that's the extent to which Jesus loves you, if while we are still on earth, He invites you to obedience, why do you think He is inviting you to obedience? Because He loves you. And He's got a plan for you. But fear steps in and says, oh, no, don't trust Jesus. Trust yourself. Don't trust Jesus. Trust your judgment. So here's 3 things I'm asking you to do to realize we're entering a season where your fear and your faith are going to collide head on. So here's the 3 things I'm asking you to do. First, begin a month of prayer. Begin a month of prayer. Again, prayer is how we clean out our hearts before the Lord and ask God to reveal the truth about who we are and who He is in our lives. Prayer, uninterrupted prayer, is how we discern God's will and see His plan for our lives. So I want you to begin a month of prayer. And here's one of the things I want you to pray. God, is my level of generosity generating change? God, is my level of generosity generating change? God, what would it look like to honor you with my generosity for the next 2 years of the Second Stage Initiative? Would you show that to me? What would it look like to honor you with my generosity for the next 2 years through Second Stage? Now, earlier I pointed out your commitment card. And again, this is the most exciting part of Second Stage, and here's the reason why. What you end up writing on this card, and we're not writing anything today, what you end up writing on this card is going to be a symbol of your trust and obedience to what Jesus invites you to do over the next 2 years. And this has nothing to do with me. I'm not asking anything of you. This is you doing business with Jesus. But this is where fear is going to try and take your eyes on Jesus. Well, if we become more generous, what about this vacation I want to take? What about making ends meet? What about our kids getting ready to go to college? I'm telling you, it has already been talking to me when I think about this card. Fear is going to talk to you. Begin a month of prayer to prepare your heart to deal with that fear and fix your eyes on Jesus. Begin a month of prayer. Second thing is this. Begin a month of conversations. And this is just as important as your month of prayer. If you are married, unless you are the exceptional couple, finances are perhaps a stressful topic of conversation in the marriage. Because there's arguments about this is what he wants to do with the money, this is what she wants to do with the money. I'm inviting you into a conversation where both of you are coming together and saying, but what does God want us to do with our money? And you need to begin that conversation today. Furthermore, I want you to take this conversation into your small groups. Now, again, there's a study guide every week of the series. I want you to preview it ahead of time. It's in your book so you can know what's coming up. But I am challenging you in your small groups to go to a new level of transparency in your small group with your financial reality and all of the fears that come along with it. There are very few people who don't look at their financial reality and have some sense of fear, shame, or stories of mistakes. It's the exceptional person who can become transparent with those things. It's the exceptional person who can say, I am going to share my mistakes and my fears about generosity with this select group of trusted people. And let me tell you why this is so important. The thing that makes fear lose its control over your life, and nobody likes being controlled by fear, is transparency. If you decide, I am going to be honest about my fears and my shames and my mistakes with my group, not with the whole world and certainly not with Jason, but with my small group I will, you will see fear evaporate before your very eyes, and it will lose its grip over you. Bring it into the light. That's how fear loses its power, and I want you to be free from that fear. If you're not in a small group at Hope, stop by the Second Stage Hub in the lobby. We've got a short-term group, 4 weeks long. It starts this Wednesday night so that you can have an environment to do that as well, because we want you to be free from fear, and Jesus wants you to be free from fear in your financial world. Last thing is this. Be here for the next 4 weeks. This is just the beginning. You've got so many questions. I don't have time to address all of them in only one message. Be here the next 4 weeks and learn more about our next stage as a church. Now, imagine for a moment. What if, years from now, every single one of us decides to engage with Second Stage? Because that's our primary goal, 100% engagement. $3.4 million, that's a secondary goal. Our primary goal is every single one of us, not 50% of us, not 80% of us, that every single person who calls Hope their church would go before God and say, what does it look like to honor you and prioritize you financially for the next 2 years? That's our primary goal, and what would happen if we did that? In fact, because that's our primary goal, let me tell you something. If somebody came up to me after the service and said, Jason, I believe in this. I believe in our future. I am going to write a check right now, $3.4 million. I'm going to cover the whole thing, Jason. Do you know what I would do? I would look that person in the eye, and I would say, that's HOPE space CHURCH. That's what I would do. I would. And then we would do this anyway, because that's less than 1% of us leveraging and harnessing this truth that generosity generates change. God wants that for all of us. So I would just assume that God has a $6.8 million vision for our future. That's what I would assume. But God doesn't need the money. He can feed 5,000 people with Lunchables. He wants to change our hearts. He wants to change our lives, and He will use that to give us a front row seat to His abundant goodness. So I want you to imagine the mark this will leave in the culture of our church forever if we all decide, it's me and Jesus. What's He calling me to do? See, God's generosity has changed our lives. He sent His Son Jesus. And we, as His children, want to imitate our Father in heaven. And we know that generosity generates change. So when it comes to generosity, what is Jesus inviting you to do? We'll pick it up there next week. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank You that You are a generous God who loves us and gave Himself up for us. Thank You that for our sakes You became poor, so that through Your poverty we have indeed become rich as heirs of eternal life, living such short lives on this planet on our way home to heaven. And while we are here, You have called us to obey You because You love us. Father, when it comes to our generosity, we want to honor You and serve You, but fear is going to try and take our eyes off You. So in this journey that we're beginning today, let our hope and our confidence be on You so that we can trust You with whatever You call us to do, so that we can be a church that harnesses this truth that generosity generates change. Bless us during this series, Lord. We ask it in Your name. Amen.